Hi all, and welcome to the latest moderation podcast, this time around Assessment Task 2, the Learning Progress Report to the Teacher Mentor. I'm a little bit apprehensive about this podcast because I think that you guys would be more on the money with this marking than I am, given your experience, but we'll give it a go nonetheless. This is the first page of an assignment that is done by one of my generally weaker students. This student is an English as a second or alternative language student, so when reading this I need to both acknowledge her language limitations but at the same time allow for it. And by that I mean that I need to try and find the meaning in amongst all the secretarial errors in her written language. But I also need in my feedback to acknowledge that she needs to do far more work on structuring her arguments and on her grammar. The first part of the Learning Progress Report template asks the students to provide a context, an overview of their sequence of lesson plans, what the lesson intentions were, and draw on the learner biographies to support their approach. I find that this particular section here is the equivalent of the report. I'm finding it very difficult to really glean what the sequence of lessons was until right at the very end of the paragraph down here. She finally gets around to making it clearer. Her use of language in the earlier part of the report is not as clear as it should be or could be. She has some outline of the intentions, but and she draws a little on some of the information from the learner biography, but really mostly it's quite generalised and vague, so it's not all that helpful in providing a context. In reading further into this particular student's report on learning progress, I was a bit disappointed about the limited use of the learner biography details to support her reflections. This probably is a reflection of the thinness of this student's learner biographies, which were quite lacking in detail of themselves. So that's always going to be a struggle for the students where their learner biography was weak to begin with. It makes it very difficult then for them to draw on information from the learner biographies to support their reflections. One of the things that concerns me with this student is in this particular statement here, her assessment is really relying very heavily on her observation skills, but I feel that her ability to observe at a deep level is quite limited. She argues here that the student still needs more time to understand this, and my comment here, which you can't stand, is it just time that the students need? I suspect that the students that she's talking about need a whole lot more than just time. So this shows me that there's not strong insight into what learner progress might look like and how, as a teacher, you might need to respond to that. So that one was a little bit of a concern. In this section here, she talks about how she told the student not to show her but to show other students. And my question back to my pre-service teacher in this instance is why? Why would you tell Imogen to show the other students? I'm sure there's a good reason lurking in there, but it's not made explicit, and there's no link back to any information from the learner biography that might suggest that this might be a useful strategy for Imogen to help her with her learning by having to explain it. It might improve her understanding, might improve her self-esteem and confidence. There's none of that in here, so I think that's a really missed opportunity to make a stronger link to the learner biography. I was also a little concerned here that I don't tell her how to do it. I let Imogen tell her how to do it in response to Erin's struggling as it got harder. I would like to mention something in relation to here about scaffolding. I understand and accept that sometimes when kids explain things to other kids, the message goes through in ways that we fail to get the message across. However, I still think that there's maybe a little abrogation of responsibility here about this particular pre-service teacher understanding the need for scaffolding and having such scaffolds planned. So I was a little bit concerned about that. I'm not really sure what struggling means either in this context. It's not really clear enough. But in the next little section, she does start to respond to my concerns earlier. Imogen got more sense on this learning as she was explaining her way of doing this. I saw her progress of learning. So there's starting to be this kind of analysis, although it's not particularly strong. In this area, the student is starting to really interpret the evidence of learning progress. She talks initially about the evidence that she gathered to establish a baseline, but I'm a little concerned about the lack of professional language used. They got no sense of how improper fractions work. They didn't know how. And I just find her language a little bit uncertain and perhaps unprofessional. That's something that might come with more time, but other students' assignments are using far more professional language in how they're reporting on progress. I'm not sure, for example, this is an example, she are at the standard of their maths work. I really have no idea what that means. I'm trying hard to get over the language limitations of this assignment, of this student, but I still really don't know what she's saying when she says those words. She says here that she's collected their workbook, but there's no appendix, there's no copy of the work samples or of any other evidence in this assignment. So that's really not a strong thing to do. Not a good thing at all. She's relying down here on her own observations. In my implemented class, she seems more relaxed. She even asked me for more practice. But again, there's no evidence, there's no observation notes, no handwritten notes to substantiate that that's actually what she saw. So I would prefer to see evidence added for that. Improves much more on her work. Again, I'm not sure what does that actually mean. In what areas has Imogen improved? She starts to get to that a little bit here. She started to have more sense of doing it. I'm not sure what that means. So, and again here, my student is saying at the end of this assessment, I asked them to write a few sentences to tell me what they've learnt. Where are the sentences? Again, no evidence is provided. And I think there's some minimal level of interpreting that sort of evidence. Where would I score this particular student? This bit's really easy. There's no supporting materials in any of the appendices, and I thought that there was a minimal context for the student learning. I had a brief understanding of the outline of the sequence of lessons. I thought there was minimal use of the learner biographies to support evidence, so I'd be scoring her somewhere in this area. Wow, that's a bit of a scribble. Sorry about that. I think over here there was vague language being used to describe the learning progress. I didn't think it was quite specific enough. There was minimal description of the learning progress made. Not very many references to shifts in the baseline data. And I think there were kind of, very few insights into their behaviours and attitudes, but there were some. Language is at times ambiguous. I can live with that for this particular student. Not all students were included in the group, so again, I'm tending towards a very low level pass or a just failing on those two criteria for this student. For the last two criteria, I would probably talk about limited range of evidence to support inference. I think there are some signs that she's beginning to interpret the evidence, but there's a very limited level of professional judgment that's being shown. So she's starting, but to me she's quite a way behind where a lot of the other students in my group certainly are. And definitely here, I can read and understand the majority of the report, but the spelling and grammar and the structure, the organisation of her thoughts really detracts from the report a great deal. So at the moment, I'm probably waiting for Jen to get back so she can double mark this one, but it's really a borderline pass or fail for me, and not a particularly strong example at all. So I'm going to go from the rather weak to the much stronger assignment in this case. I particularly like this assignment because of its comprehensive yet concise nature, and this is exemplified in the opening context section. The student starts off up here by giving me a broad focus. This is about fractions, series of pre-test informing directions, and a little bit of background. These are the students who were struggling in multiple areas of the particular pre-test. What I also liked is that this student has told me that they started off with one set of plans for the sequencing through fractions, but as a result of the learning progress made by the students, he had to modify the initial sequence, and he's shown me here what the ultimate sequence that he delivered ended up being. For each lesson, there is a clear description and a clear list of the particular learning intentions, or the specific learning intentions for each of those lessons. So to me, this was just really clear, really to the point, really unambiguous, and beautifully worded. One of the other features of this opening section of the report is some clear links here to information that was in this student's learner biographies. And this student had really strong learner biographies with lots of baseline data, lots of really good observations, and some wonderful inferences drawn from the evidence about the particular students. So I quite liked the way that this student has linked that in. It's quite explicit, it's quite clear and relevant. The next section that we asked the students to report on was a professional reflection here. One of the things I love about being a university lecturer is when my students make it easy for me to mark their assignments. And this student, God bless his little socks, has done exactly that. In providing his reflection, he has used the specific headings that we gave out of the 4R models. So he started with report, then moved to relating, reason. In the next page, he provides his reconstruction. So that just makes me smile to begin with, because it's easier to mark, and you don't have to go looking quite as hard for the messages. The other thing that I really liked about this student's reflection was, as requested, he's focused more on the learner progress. So he's reflecting more on the learner progress. I had another assignment that I was going to show you. It was partly a bit too long, but the reflection, whilst an amazingly strong reflection, was more about the students, the pre-service teacher's own teaching, rather than reflecting on the students learning as much. So that's going to be a tricky one for me to grade. But this one, it's terrific, as it focuses very much on the learning of the students rather than his teachings necessarily. But throughout, there are some relating to strengths, his own strengths, linking back to some messages in the tutorials that we've given, but particularly looking at the what happened in the class. Took longer than anticipated, caused a shift in my lesson sequence. I would need to create expert activities, so quite a strong reflection. And now to the section of the report that really focuses in on the student's learning progress. I think this pre-service teacher has done a really strong job here. He's referred to the baseline data, and then after lesson 1. So there's some of the key terms that I would be looking for. So he's noted that the only time any of them exhibited a low degree was all of this sort of stuff. This highlights progress for all participants. He then focuses specifically on one of his 2 learners. Then after lesson 1, the student was able to successfully place values on a number line. So the language here about progress is really quite specific. In the next example, it's very vague, very ambiguous. Here, our pre-service teacher is able to articulate very clearly what the student is able to do. Very specific. He's able to successfully place values on a number line, which was one of the learning intentions. He's able to demonstrate, to express what a fraction they would need to complete the number line. So again, giving really strong evidence and quite specific language about what the student can now do. Very unambiguous, which is what we like. He refers here to his learning trackers and baseline data. I'll show those to you in a moment. But he has data in his appendices that back up the inferences that he's making here. The other thing I like about this particular report is that he's reporting also on the whole student, not just on their learning of the content of the lesson sequence, and linking back to the learner biography. So I score quite highly for this section as well. On this final page of the report, this pre-service teacher continues with his analysis of the data and his results. After me doing this, then these 3 students were able to move on to the expert sheets, answer these questions correctly after working together. The student then goes on to offer some possible explanations as to why this progress was achieved. He's using games as a way to engage the students, having a partner to rely on, and talking about the use of concrete materials in the maths to assist the students. And he's summarised his learning there. Here's an example of the evidence that this pre-service teacher has drawn on, just one example. He had a learning tracker for all 3 of his lessons in the sequence, and I love that our students are constructing their own observation tools and audit tools. I think that's fantastic. So in this, he's for each of the activities that he's run during the lesson was to observe the degree of mastery of each of the 5 students in his group for each of the learning intentions. And he's done that throughout the whole 3 sequence of lessons. So I quite like that. So I'm giving a big tick for that evidence, and he's used that evidence in his writing, in his reflection. This is another source of evidence that the student has used, and quite a number of students in my group have done similar sorts of things. They've used a metacognitive exercise with their students, getting their students to reflect on their own learning, a little bit of assessment as learning, and use that as part of the evidence upon which they've drawn to make inferences about the students' learning progress. So again, big tick for doing things like that. So, how would I score this particular assignment on our rubric? I was thinking that in terms of the quality of the report, I put it up into the HD area, probably this end of it though, just because it is a little on the brief side, but brevity is what we were really after, I guess. So it's very clear. It clearly outlines the sequence in the lessons, includes the learning intentions. It draws on professional reflection really quite beautifully, makes sophisticated use of the learner biographies, and includes all the relevant data sources in the appendices. There were some other things in that assignment that I didn't show you as evidence that was in there. In terms of the description of progress, I also thought that was, for a first year student, particularly good. So again, I'd be up in this section of the rubric. Particularly the learning progress was really quite specific and really focused on individual students, referred to baseline data and shifts in the data all the time. And I thought starting to get into sophisticated insights into their behaviours and approaches, identify strengths as well as areas for improvement. So I thought it was quite a strong section in terms of the description of the progress. For this one, again, I'd be operating up in this level. There is a range of evidence that the student draws on in appropriate ways to support his inferences. And I think he's demonstrating a really strong ability to interpret the evidence and making professional judgments. There are not too many assumptions. He's drawn on the evidence to do that. And this one's really easy. It's incredibly well done. The only issue is a typo where lesson is misspelt on a couple of occasions, which you might pick up or not. So overall, I thought it was probably at the lower end of a high distinction range for this particular assignment. So that's how I'm marking them at the moment. I hope that helps you with your own marking. You're probably all ahead of where I'm up to anyway. Talk to you soon.